What's going on, guys? So I was just about to start unboxing these shelves that we picked up from Sam's Club. We have, wow, four more of these that we've inside the shop, and they've been working absolutely fantastic. And looking at these shelves makes me kind of think about something that's similar in terms of topic. Hang tight, I'll be right back. Okay, so some of you, as I start this topic, are going to be like, you don't know what you're talking about. But the engineers out there and the folks who are technically minded and like to think about things are probably going to chime in. And I would imagine if you're unbiased and you're not approaching this from some, awkward biased angle, and you're simply looking at this from a technical perspective, you'll know exactly where I'm going with this. So these shelves are rated to 10,000 pounds. Not kidding you, 10,000 pounds. Each shelf has like a 2,500 pound capacity. It's absolutely insane. And when you look at these shelves and when you unbox them, you'll realize that there's nothing extraordinarily heavy duty about any component in here. If you look at any component by itself, it flexes, it can twist. It actually seems as if you pulled it out and you didn't see that rating there and you just pulled each piece and looked at it, you'd be like, this thing might maybe hold 1,000 pounds, maybe 250 pounds per shelf. But when you look at the actual rating, and of course, they can't just arbitrarily throw any rating on this. They have to be able to throw a rating because, first of all, it's Sam's Club, and they don't want to find themselves in a lawsuit because they put an unrealistic weighting on the shelves. Now, of course, they have a little asterisk right there, which probably means that you have to be careful and you have to understand what you're doing. You have to load the shelves properly and the weight must be evenly distributed, right? You look at this thing and you're like, my goodness, how can this hold the weight of a 36-foot long travel trailer? The entire weight of a 36-foot long travel trailer. Doesn't that sound insane? All right, so let's dive into this a little bit. First of all, this entire shelf, I don't know how much this box weighs. Usually they put a weight somewhere on here, 123 pounds. So how does a 123-pound shelf system hold 10,000 pounds, 2,500 pounds per shelf, over a ton per shelf, right? It's because it's engineered. It's designed that way. Now, you may look at some of the welds and some of the bolts, and really there's not a lot of welds here. It's just more bolts than anything. But there's a few welds, and you're going to be like, oh my gosh, how does this stuff actually, possibly come close to supporting what they claim? This is the same with almost anything that's properly engineered. If you properly engineer it, you don't need to put gussets and all sorts of bracing where you might normally think you would to reinforce everything. You don't need to add as much mass. If you're smart about it and you design something properly and the correct amount of engineering goes into it, yes, a 123-pound shelving system can hold 10,000 pounds. And again, it's just understanding, how do you distribute the weight on there? How do you position it? What's smart? Is it actually smart to go to 10,000 pounds, right? I certainly would not want to disassemble a 10,000-pound travel trailer because that is a large travel trailer. To put that in perspective, that's almost twice the weight of our Surveyor. That's probably a good way of putting it, the dry weight of our Surveyor. That's a lot of weight. That's the equivalent of a couple of my tractors and then some. So we're not talking about an insignificant amount of weight. And to give this thing a 10,000-pound capacity rating is pretty insane. And in my opinion, it's almost irresponsible in a sense. But I also don't know what they've done to test this. And again, you're talking about a major corporation, Sam's Club, who's putting their brand on this. They obviously feel as if this should be able to meet that specification, and if properly loaded, it shouldn't have any problem doing it. That's at least my gut feeling. Now, again, when we look at frames, a lot of folks think more steel, more steel, more steel. A lot of people would probably look at this and say, man, this thing should be weighing 1,000 pounds if it's going to hold 10,000 pounds. This thing should weigh a lot more. But again, when things are engineered properly, it's not so much the weight, it's how you use the material that you have. And all of this stuff is super, super thin. It is not thick material. Go to your local Sam's Club. You don't even have to go to an RV dealership. You don't have to fly up to Indiana. Go to a Sam's Club. They usually have this on display assembled. Feel it yourself. It's very thin material. And It's rated to 10,000 pounds. And all I'm trying to make the point of in this video is you judge a product when you look at it. They have an entire team of engineers. It's not just one person. It's multiple engineers looking at structures going, how do we ensure that the rating we put on here is accurate? How do we ensure that it's engineered to do what we specifically want it to do? How do we ensure that the specifications that have been provided to us by our partners are correct and there's not the risk of liability because one thing's going to fail? Now, when you look at the shelving system, if I take parts of it off, it loses that integrity. If I take little pieces of it off, it can absolutely lose that integrity. This system relies on it being completely assembled and distributed properly and being assembled correctly for it to hold the weight that it's rated to hold. So those are things you also have to think about. If everything is set up correctly, if the manufacturer of an RV is doing what they're supposed to do, if Lippert is doing what they're supposed to do, and you're doing what you're supposed to do as a consumer, and paying close attention to any problem. If I had weight on here and all of a sudden I loaded too much weight on one side of it and I saw part of the frame starting to buckle, if I saw part of something starting to fail, would I continue to do it? Would I take all 10,000 pounds and put it just on one side of it? Right? Would I take 5,000 pounds and put it on one side even though it's half the total capacity this thing's rated at? Those are things you have to think about. This shelf is the perfect example. Some people might look at this and be like, yeah, but you're not dragging it down the road. Of course you're not. Those are things that are even more complex to think about. How do you make something that's lightweight, that can hold a tremendous amount of weight and stay together when you have no idea where somebody's going to take it? And by all practical accounts, you hope they don't take it off the beaten path and you hope they keep it on reasonably maintained roads. Those are all things, again, you kind of have to think about. And this is where my thought comes from when I look at things. I think if it's engineered properly, it can be lightweight, it can be super strong, as long as you understand and practice common sense. That's really what it comes down to. Again, I'm not going to take 3,000 pounds and load it all on one side right here. If I load this thing up with weight like I have in the shop, we probably have a couple thousand pounds at least on some of these, but it's distributed. It's not just in one spot. If I start to see something potentially failing, I'm going to stop messing with it in that area. I'm probably going to stop using it. If I see something deforming or deflecting, I'm going to see why. Is it on unlevel ground? If I put this on unlevel ground, it's going to twist. It's not going to have that rigidity that is required because every one of these rails are independent. It's not welded together as one structure. When you snap it all into place, it creates the total structure. So I hope this video kind of adds some clarification because this is just one example. There are lots and lots and lots of products out there, including the cabinets that we'll assemble, including all sorts of things. Tractor trailers, semi-tractor trailers are not a body on frame. The entire body and structure must work together. If the wall fails, the whole thing fails. These are the examples of what I'm talking about. If it is a problem with how the product is manufactured, then absolutely that needs to be fixed. That needs to be remedied, and there has to be responsibility by the manufacturer to fix it. So don't think I'm trying to say the manufacturers don't play a part. What I want you all to understand is when you see materials that you're like, man, that needs to be a ½ inch thick to be able to support weight, that is entirely not true. It doesn't even make sense in a lot of cases because you add so much mass that your structure now has to actually support the mass you've added to it. If I add an upper deck that weighs 600 pounds more than it currently weighs, well, then the riser, the frame structure, has to now support those additional 600 pounds of weight. So again, when you look at something like that, just use something like this. Use things around your home as an example of what is needed to properly engineer a structure. And it's not always more material. It's engineering. It's properly putting material where it needs to be and doing it the right way. Because I can tell you something kind of crazy. You could probably go to 12.5 people who you think are expert welders or people who you think are just absolutely fantastic at doing something, and they might build a shelf that you would not put a 10,000 pound rating on. You would probably say maybe 3,000 pounds, maybe 4,000 pounds. But these folks have obviously engineered a product that can hold 10,000 pounds worth of weight with materials that I bet most of you, once you look at, you would be like, oh, wow, no freaking way. Just something to think about. And again, don't put your criticism hat on. Don't put your bias hat on. Put your unbiased hat on. Put your technical cap on and think about it from an engineering standpoint. Anyways, guys, hope you enjoyed the video. If you don't, I'm sorry. I mean, honestly, I am. This is just a pretty good example, and I was in the process of unboxing it, and I'm like, man, I can make a really good point with this that hopefully most people will understand and appreciate. 123-pound product can hold 10,000 pounds. when you set it up properly, you distribute the weight properly, you don't put it on unlevel ground, and you just don't treat it like it's something it's not supposed to be. Anyways, guys, again, if you haven't had a chance, please take a moment, subscribe to the channel, give me a thumbs up. We'll talk to you again very soon.